don't know about yet or haven't considered yet. We don't know the implications of that. Originally, I thought this particular notice of motion was too transactional, too operational, but I've thought long and hard about it, and it is actually the intention was to make good an issue that we created, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to that in a moment. And that is, I think, an apprehension of bias that we created through an incorrect communication to those people at the caravan park. And this was to set right, the intention of Councillor Pelt's notice of motion was to set that right. This has substantially changed that intention, and I think it's a substantial change to the notice of motion that I don't think, councillors, we actually want to do without greater thought of the implication of many other licences and leases that we have. So I can't support the amendment.
Thank you, councillors. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, a show of hands there. Councillor Ellis. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Reeves, for adding that intellectual piece of thinking. It's good work when we start to look into these complex issues. The issue that I've been concerned about is predetermination, a bit like yourself in relation to these matters. And yes, your point about casting that out and knowing not what we're going to bring back in is a concern. I'll be referring to the Lakes Entrance paddle boats issue, which shows very, very similar issues of commonality with the Omeo Caravan Park matter. It was, when I think about it, that caravan park has created this issue, but it provides it, and the word incumbency does bring us in. We are addressing a policy issue here that we've let slip through, and it's the responsibility of council to oversee the activities, to attack or not permit predeterminism in decision making, and to ensure that we maintain transparency. I am inclined, noting that there is an action as a result of the previous motion to limit the impact of this decision to a 3-month period. I think that's what time the matter's got to come back to the new council. It will be a matter of policy review, and as such, I think that in the short term, this does widen the net. Everything you say is quite correct, but it picks up some injustices that we are not yet, may have not as yet identified. And I'm sure that when public discourse is held in relation to this motion this evening, we will hear of other lessees we're facing perhaps similar difficulties. I hope not, but it's quite possible, particularly with the Lakes Entrance issue. So I'm happy to support Councillor O'Connell's amendment to this substantive motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Now, Councillor Roberts, you've put your hand up.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm actually quite torn about this one because I do agree in principle with Natalie O'Connell's amendment, and I agree with the intent of the motion, but I tend to, I've note the words of Councillor Reeves, and I tend to agree that we potentially may be introducing some unknown impacts into our policy, because this is essentially what it is. It's a policy change. But I do agree with the intent, and I think the intent is there, but I also believe that the intent of Councillor O'Connell's amendment is also caught in the previous notice of motion that we just agreed to. So yeah, it's the 90 days that I'm getting hung up on. While I believe it's appropriate in the instance that we're referring to with the Omeo Caravan Park, I think it just becomes a bit broad in terms of applying this globally to all leases. So I think it's a good amendment, but I just think we need potentially a little bit more time to, probably not this council, but it potentially is a discussion that is had with the future council, because I think there's some good points in there, but I just think the broader impact needs to be more considered. So therefore, unfortunately, I can't support the amendment, but thanks for bringing it forward, Natalie.
Good. Councillor Pelt, you put your hand up.
Yes, I wouldn't mind a point of clarification, if I may, just in regards to the complexity of what Councillor O'Connell is actually suggesting or implying, and it goes back to the previous motion that we've put in place, and we've actually asked, which is actually a policy thing, whereas this is actually the current item is actually a governance thing. So they are two different things. And I'm sort of curious about the policy guidelines that we've just implemented and passed, how that actually will work if Councillor O'Connell's amendment is actually accepted tonight.
Sorry, Mayor. I'm reluctant to call a point of order. Councillor Peltz, we're in debate.
Yeah, quite true.
We've gone. Sorry, Councillor Roos, we have gone this far as Councillor Peltz has virtually completed a request for clarification. So I think at this stage, if Mr. Cannizzaro was prepared to answer that,
just how many clarifications can we have while we're still in debate? That's all.
Yeah.
One. So, Mr. Cannizzaro, please.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. If we likened notice of motion 4/2020 to notice of motion 3/2020, then we'd have to call for a report because it is linked to potential change to the policy. So referencing back to 10.14 5C, whatever the number was, I apologise, my memory's failing. Correct. It does bring it back to that one, yeah.
Okay, that's what I was worried about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I actually do agree that was a very fair question, even though we're in debate. Was something that needed to be clarified because it's going to help the other councillors here in the decision making. So.
If I may, I'd like to comment, please, Mr. Mayor. I know I've just had a question, but I'd like to now have a bit of a debate, and I'd like to state that I'm still happy to go with the original wording on the grounds that and not accept Councillor O'Connell's, although the incentive is there, and I do believe that's right. With regards to this particular council, I believe the original wording is correct to get the Omeo Caravan Park lease agreements settled and solved, and I believe the new council can bring in the wording of, and would be more appropriate for the new council to bring in the wording that you've suggested, and I think that won't go by the wayside, and I think it was really great that you've tabled it, so I won't be supporting it tonight, and I'll be going with my original motion. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's been a bit of mask mumbling going on.
Oh, sorry.
I wouldn't. I feel that this, what kicked it off was the Omeo Caravan Park in the first place. It energised the whole thing, and I think they should be left in and not extracted or redacted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. So we would. Yeah. So I would revert back to you, Councillor O'Connell, for your right of reply.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it short. I think the points have been covered. I really, as I've said, the intent of the motion hasn't changed. It's just to be inclusive of the leases. They will be reviewed within 3 to 6 months, as been stated, so we will find the implications of any other leases that are there. I mean, as Councillor Ellis referred to, there is another known lease that is in this predicament. There may be others. So rather than being specific, I think we need to be inclusive of all those leases that may be affected. So that's why I had proposed the amendment. So I'd encourage you to support it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So, councillors, that brings us to the point of voting for or against this amendment to our to Councillor Peltz's motion. So I'd ask councillors, all those in favour of the amendment? Thank you. All those against? So the amendment to the motion is defeated. Councillor Ellis, Councillor O'Connell, Councillor Toohey and Councillor Rotino voted for. Thank you, councillors. So that reverts us back to the original motion that has been on the table.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and Councillor O'Connell. I do believe that whoever's in the next council should keep your wording, and it should be tabled at the next appropriate time. But for this particular reasoning tonight, the complexity of the Greens section in the first motion is what held me back from supporting it, because it would mean a longer process for this to be implemented, which meant there wasn't enough time for it to happen for the Omeo Caravan Park in particular. So with that stated, I fully support what you've tabled, and but with this particular item this evening, it's been worded specifically, and I do agree with Councillor Reeves that there's issues like the hangars, which are leasing agreements, and those sorts of things which are specific leasing agreements, and I don't believe they should come under the same framework as what these particular commercial agreements are. So I think there is still work to be done in that area, and I encourage the officers to start thinking about that, because it would be great if it could come to the table more sooner than later in the new year for the new council to be adopting, because they're such vital business contracts for our community, to be able to entertain the tourism side, and to be able to operate and have some kind of livelihood after this terrible period, the COVID period and the black summer that we've experienced. I mean, it's just been the most horrific year, and I believe these people need some support, and I think we should be respectful in the way we deal with them. So with that said, I think I've said enough, and everyone understands the sentiment of the tabled motion, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. So, councillors, with us back to the original motion, I believe we... I'm glad somebody else has made the same error. So I did on the first one, as it took so long. We went around and round. But, so, councillors, I would ask you to vote now.
Can we speak to the substantive motion, please,
We're
Mr.
back to
Mayor?
that. Yes, all right. Well, Councillor Reeves has got just in front of you, because he did second the motion, Councillor Ellis.
Quite right.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, councillors. Thanks for the discussion and the debate. I think that's healthy, and it will get a better outcome as a result of that debate. This, as I mentioned previously, when I first saw this notice of motion, I thought it was particularly maybe too transactional, too operational. But in consideration and review and reflection on the matters around this particular item, and that is the Omeo Caravan Park, I think that we, as an organisation, have contributed to the divergence from the policy for the leasing of public land on this occasion. We didn't perhaps follow our own policy properly. I think that we created an apprehension of bias through some communication that we have provided to that particular lessee, and we need to ensure that we follow our own policy. And what this particular notice of motion does, I think, is draws a really specific lens back onto this particular operation to make sure that we follow policy, just on this particular item. And that's what's really important. We've precedents where our council has provided in-house bids for tenders, and we shouldn't be concerned to follow that due process in future. Councillors in this council group, you have been part of that and seen them, and the organisation has done that before. So we need to follow that due process to ensure the best outcome for our community, and that's what it's about. The current lessee, somebody else, in-house bid, whatever the outcome is, it needs to be the best outcome for our community. And that's all that this notice of motion is asking us. Focus on this place. We made a mistake. We need to make it good. Now remember, this notice of motion will lapse as well. It actually has a sunset clause, 90 days after the awarding of the lease in future. So it's actually quite a good notice of motion in that sense, where the amendment had an enduring quality, and that's what I was concerned about. So this will lapse next year at some stage. That's what we understand. So, councillors, I urge you to support this. It does look a bit operational and transactional, I get that. I've spoken to other councillors about that, but it'll actually, I think, make good an issue that we created.
Councillor Roberts, you had your hand up?
Sorry, no, I just had my hand on to my chin. Sorry, my mistake. Nothing to add, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ellis, you've got your hand up and you are now secure.
I didn't think I was in any risk then, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for caring for me. I just want to follow up on the words of Councillor Reeves in relation to this matter, because we're not in conflict with that. What I was concerned about when speaking to the thoughtful amendment that was put forward by Councillor O'Connell was the fact that we've focused on the Omeo Caravan Park, and that locality and that business was the catalyst of a concern and in relation to a problem created by council. And that is our role, to oversee and correct our problems. There is a clear, apprehension of bias, as Councillor Reeves mentioned a number of times. But that also applies in other examples around our shire. By missing out on the amendment, we won't be able to pick those up. So there will be some injustices carried out. And I refer to the Lakes Entrance paddle boat situation, where a similar lease and similar opportunity and other activities are leading to the concern and angst of our existing leaseholders. It's a problem that we need to look at that policy. The policy needs to be reviewed and corrected to ensure that we don't have mass numbers of people being subjected to errors in policy. And I've had tonight calls in relation to, not only as other councillors are aware, in relation to the Bairnsdale Airfield, but also perhaps to our marinas. And as we know, we have over 350 customers from memory down in that area. So, this is a problem we need to address and the need to address well. So the Omeo Caravan Park is the catalyst for a problem that council needs to address. And I do naturally therefore support action by council and encourage councillors to support this motion before council tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Now, Councillor Rotino wishes to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Reeves really has put it into perspective. I'm happy with the decision. We lost the amendment, but I did think the amendment was a fairer thing. But I can see that we do need to fix the wrong of the way we communicated that end of lease commercial discussion with the Omeo Caravan Park. But I do still believe that the notice of motion that we first unanimously supported would have captured and fixed that as well. I don't think it's necessary, but having said that, I'm in full support of fixing it up tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm reminded of an in-house bid that we did some time ago in regards to a bid that we put in gardens or roads or something or other, whatever it was. This was some time ago, and we went through that process and there was not one issue at all. In my opinion, this particular motion won't address the end of lease issue that we created. That can't be addressed by a motion like this. So I'm afraid I can't support this motion. I think it's too operational. It's not policy. I don't think we should be getting involved in operational issues. We are here to create policies, in my opinion, and to ensure that those policies perform the function that they should. And that's where I think that's the space that we need to be playing in. And I agree, and obviously voted with the first motion because I thought it was a good policy. But this is too prescriptive, so I can't support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you wish to... yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think all discussion is now finished. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I have the right of reply. And councillors, I do hope that you'll consider this to support tonight, because you know there's been a serious issue in regards to this, and this particular motion is more about operational. And like I said before, I would really have liked to have been able to entertain Natalie's amendment, but when I looked at the crunch of it all, there was further handbrakes or further internal things that would stop the operations happening directly. And it would have, because I think the officers felt that it actually then turned into policy, and we ended up having to put a report. They would have to do a report on it, which would slow down the process, whereas this is directly implemented as of when it's adopted tonight. So I think that's the difference of the two, and I fully agree that your wording was more appropriate for the whole of the region, but I agree also with Mark about the sunset clause on this particular issue. And you know, I implore the next council group to take that wording and be constructive with the wording that Natalie's put on the table and Joe's helped word to rectify the issue that we're addressing tonight, because you know, going into the future, our community deserves really good, robust, respectful policy that actually addresses what the issue is, which is actually the leasing of Crown land, which has specific guidelines that doesn't give any particular officer, whether it be the CEO or an officer, the right of revoking a leasing agreement, which is what we've done in the first motion. The second motion is operational. Now we've asked the CEO to come up with a guideline that we believe should be fit for policy, you know, and assessment into the future of fair and respectful tendering processes on a level playing field. So I guess that's what I've asked for, and I hope that you support it. So with that said, I think enough words have been spoken about, and great discussion around the table. Thanks, guys. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. So now we get to the part that I tried to get going before, to have a vote. So all those in favour of Councillor Peltz's motion? Thank you, councillors. All those against? Thank you for Vanessa. It's Councillor Toohey who voted against, and there were 8 votes for this amendment, this motion. Thank you. Thank you for all that, Councillor Peltz, and gets us to item 3, which is to deferred business. So I believe there would be
There is no deferred business.
Thank you. So item 4 is our council delegate report. So Councillor Toohey.
No, nothing for this week. Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor.
Councillor Rotino.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've just got a very quick verbal report. How good does the Bairnsdale Skate Park look? And I have it on good authority that once it's opened, it will be known as amongst the best skate parks in Victoria.
Well done. Councillor Reeves.
And speaking of how good will regional Victoria be from Friday onwards, councillors, with the step 3 restrictions applying? I think midnight Thursday night, isn't it? Midnight Thursday night, councillors.
My apologies, it is actually tomorrow.
What day is it?
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Peltz?
I hate to do this, guys, but I had another rural councils hook up on Friday, and I thought you might be interested in some of the substance that we were talking about, and I thought it was quite interesting. They have a really active group, and I really enjoy, you know, helping or, you know, being with them because they do really constructive stuff for the whole of our state. In regards to Yala Pulford, they'd had a bit of a discussion with her, and they were talking about the small business areas. There's small quick grants of $5,000 and $10,000 for the hospitality area, and they're saying with the streetscapes, the outdoor seating arrangements, we're going to have to be more conscious of all ability risks and do a bit of an assessment for our council in regards to opening up additional tables on the sidewalks of our region. So for shop owners, this will be something that our officers need to go through. And they were saying we need to be more in contact with our DH&S departments to really understand what they're dealing with and how we can actually assist them. I think that was probably one of the main things. They were talking about setting up areas of centres of excellence, which is really funny because we've actually been doing that for quite some time with our neighbours, Wellington, and they were talking about shared services, and I think we actually are probably the pinnacle and the state's landmark on that, on what we've been able to achieve with joint ventures in regards to shared employee services. So I think, I think they were aspiring to be more like us, which is great. They were talking about upskilling, and targeting a market where people are wanting to transfer into different pathways. And I said, you know, to be able to employ people and help them through to fill gaps in our departments that we actually need that kind of work. So planning or those sorts of areas would be a really great model to grab people and retrain them into those areas that we need. Paul Roach said out of the 49 rural councils, 46 of them were very viable, and the Auditor General was absolutely really rapt that you know, there was that many councils doing a good job, and that you know, the Know Your Council website was getting ticks and extra ticks. So they've really been pleased with what's been happening in that space. There's going to be an extension of the virtual meetings for another 6 months, which is what Natalie was actually asking for. So that had been discussed at the table on many levels. So well done for bringing that up and raising the attention to that at that point, Natalie. And the rating inquiries, the report won't be out until late November, which we chatted about earlier. And then that's about it really, but I just sort of felt there was enough there to be talking about and letting you know. So that was my report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. So, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, you're on mute.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Look, seeing we've got a meeting again in another fortnight, I won't make any formal report. I just simply, one thing, and that is to thank everyone from the Lakes District who put in their submissions in relation to the Jemmy's Point Lookout Complex, that we're really keen to be a real wow and successful economic driver for our future in East Gippsland. So I look forward to seeing the results coming to Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good, thank you for that. Councillor Roberts.
Nothing thrilling to report this week, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks. I'll just report on a couple of meetings that I've been to for the Omeo Mountain Bike Project, which is tracking along really well, and the construction of the pump and skills track is underway at Livingston Park, which has generated a lot of excitement to finally see some dirt being moved. So we can't wait for that to be finished. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll probably keep this very brief because it's been meetings and meetings and meetings every day, multiple meetings, but perhaps one that was reasonable note to our region and perhaps just locally to Bensdale was catching up again with the Fennings sawmill with regards to I think it's a great concept that they are looking to get the design out and the feasibility for an intermodal here in Bensdale for now that the Stratford Bridge is underway and will be completed. It produces a much better rail system which can carry freight, and if that comes to fruition, I think it'll be a big boost to our economy. But other than that, as I said, it was just meetings and meetings such as this where you just look at faces on the screen, and sometimes they look like little postage stamps to me, and it's very hard to see who you're talking to. But anyway, that's the way we live at the moment, and we're getting by, so thank you. So that will move us on to, we get into the real part of the agenda here. It's item 5 and 5.1.1. So I'll go to Stuart McConnell first to introduce, but I believe it will be spoken to by Ms Raguse. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will hand this one directly to Ms Sharon Raguse to introduce for councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Good evening, councillors. It is with pleasure that I present to you today a report from our Drought Support Officer in relation to the reallocation of drought funding. As outlined in the executive summary in September last year, Council allocated $500,000 towards a drought response program. And delivered quite a broad framework, including an allocation of $150,000 for individual drought support initiatives. At the council meeting on the 12th of November, officers also then presented a breakdown of individual support across, of that $150,000, across 5 different non-for-profit community groups, as outlined in the report: ADRA, the Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, Lions Need for Feed and Gippsland Farmers Relief. Earlier this year, we received notice from the Salvation Army that despite their best intentions, they were unable to expend that $30,000 that was issued to them under that scheme, and they subsequently returned the money to council. We've been working through the Drought Recovery Support Committee and have put in front of you today a proposal to consider for reallocation of that $30,000 to be shared equally across the remaining 4 community support organisations as outlined, $7,500 each. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The officer's recommendations are as stated in the report, and I open the floor to any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm getting advice from around the table here that there are no questions, unless I've missed somebody. So that's become very efficient. We already have Councillor Toohey wishes to move it and Councillor Reeves wishes to second it. So would you like to speak to that, please, Councillor Toohey?
Just to say, Mr Mayor, that you know, this is a good outcome. It's still going to the places that actually need it. So more than happy with this outcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor and councillors, I think we just note, as one would expect, the honesty and integrity of the Salvation Army in their return of that funding that we can then redistribute.
Yes, thank you. A very good point. Anyone else wish to speak? All right. Well, councillors, sorry, very late. I just caught you out of the corner of my eye.
Sorry, I do apologise. I just thought it was great to be able to read where the funds have been distributed to, and I think, you know, they're very worthy. I think they've all of those businesses have been really active and supporting the needs of their farmers in their drought conditions, and you know, 132 farm families suffering from hardship caused by the drought. They were supported by nutritional food hampers, monetary gifts and fuel cards, and ongoing personal support. I think, you know, just some of the money went towards paying school fees and transport for food for the animals, fodder, and medical needs. You know, I just think, you know, people forget about what's actually happened here, and it's a really easy thing for us to just breeze off, but we've come off 3 years of drought, we've gone through a bushfire, and now we're in COVID. It is absolutely economically disastrous for our region. It is really hard out there, and I just really want to say that these agencies are doing a really great job, and I couldn't think of any better cause than to redistribute the funds into the agencies that are doing really great active work on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very kind words. And of course, well done to all these organisations, because that's what they do. They support people who are in need, and they certainly found plenty of those in our shire this last 12 months or so. So, okay then, for this item 5.1.1, I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour of the redistribution of the funds? Thank you, councillors. That is unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Now this is 5.2.1, which is the Kings Cove, Metung and Paynesville Riviera Harbours request to amend legal agreements. I'm looking at my postage stamps down there on the screen. I'll go to Ms Pitkin first to introduce the presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you are aware, Nicole Reynolds, who is Acting Manager Planning, has previously briefed Council re this matter, so I'd like to introduce Nicole to talk to the report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Maybe Nicole's not...
My apologies. Thank you, Mr Mayor, fellow councillors and members of the Executive Leadership Team. Thank you for this opportunity to present this item for formal resolution this evening. The matter before you, councillors, is seeking authorisation from Council to make 11 formal applications to amend or end in part a series of Section 173 legal agreements. In summary, the agreements in question require landowners to comply with a set of development guidelines. These guidelines in turn require that an architectural review committee approves any development before development commences on a lot or any alteration occurs to an existing development. The deregistration of the relevant companies who controlled these architectural review committee means that the landowners are currently unable to obtain the required approvals. The practical effect on the ground is that the houses on vacant lots cannot be built, and existing buildings cannot be extended without breaching the agreements and restrictive covenants. The 4 parts to our recommendation before you this evening are firstly that we seek your resolution and your agreement to proceed with the applications to amend and or end agreements as per the attached guidelines. To secondly, authorise the CEO in any circumstances that may be required to make edits to the applications as required, undertake the necessary public notice immediately after the election period, and to report back to Council with any amendments for final resolutions. As I said to you before, the agreements require the landowners in the Kings Cove residential estate and in the final stages of the Riviera Harbours estate to comply with guidelines. This is a process wherein Council is a signatory to the Section 173 legal agreements, and whilst Council has no obligation to rectify this matter, officers have recommended and briefed Council on the multiple options. Our recommendation is that Council do take a lead in rectification of this matter, and the benefits being that we achieve an overall and a coordinated response, and we're able to address all affected landowners concurrently. We anticipate that there should be shorter timeframes, a comprehensive approach, one set of appeals if requires, and rather than implementing a solution and revisiting it over and over again. The statutory process going forward upon tonight's successful resolution is that we would give notice of each of the proposed amendments or ending of agreement, that we would consider the submissions or objections received. We would make a decision at Council whether to approve or refuse, and then we would deal with any application subsequent to that at VCAT. Essentially, the recommendation before you is to agree to proceed with these applications, again to authorise the CEO to make any minor editorial changes as required, to then undertake the public notice after the completion of the election period, and that upon the completion of the public notice that we direct and future report to Council for any final resolution. I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillors have any questions around the table?
Happy to move it, Mr Mayor.
All right, well, Councillor Peltz has put a hand up to move it, so Councillor Roberts, would you wish to second it then?
Happy to do so.
Good, thank you. Would you like to speak to this, please?
I'd just like to say it's great to get rid of another 173 agreement on property. I mean, who really likes them? I know they're put there for a reason, but good work, officers. You've done well to bring this to the table and start getting some motion around it. I know these people would be just itching to get some work done and start living on their properties, and so they should be able to too. So keep up the good work and let's move them forward. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Roberts?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I think this needs to be acknowledged. This is a lot of work, and it's really as unfortunate as it is for the people that have been impacted. Council's been required to step in to try and well, not even required, Council's volunteered to step in to try and do something about this at cost to Council generally. So it's a really unfortunate circumstance that these people, the affected people, have been involved with. But these things, as Councillor Pels has stated, these things happen from time to time, and with sunsetting or with companies dissolving and no way out of these legal agreements, it can be really challenging. So I commend the work that's getting done, and it's good to see that we're finally getting some traction. But I'd also ask that the community be patient with Council, because this is not generally Council's responsibility to navigate dodgy legal agreements, but it's also a great outcome. So I really hope that we can get something positive and get it happening as quickly as possible. So really happy to support this.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. So it was just one word that was used there in your comments that maybe was not quite appropriate, but we'll live with that. Councillor Rottino, you wish to speak?
Yeah, again, Mr Mayor, I'd just like to endorse the comments from Councillor Pels and Councillor Roberts. This is an extremely complex area of law, and quite often Shire is an easy target, an easy kicking target, and our planning department's been unfairly criticised recently, and I just want to acknowledge the significant work by Ms Reynolds and her team. And yeah, this mess was caused by the private sector, and the Shire's here to clean it up. So I just want to thank the planning department, Ms Reynolds, for their leadership in sorting this out. Thank you.
Good, well spoken. And Councillor Reeves, did I? No? Okay, thank you. All right. I guess we can move straight forward and put this to the vote. So all those in favour of this? Good. That's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Ms Reynolds, I believe in turning the page. Please don't go away. We have 5.2.2, which is to end a Section 173 agreement at 78 Ashley Street, Paynesville. So please, would you like to give us a summary, Ms Reynolds?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to present to Council this evening a Council report which pertains to land at 78 Ashley Street and relates to Agreement AF 202923J. Essentially, this evening we are seeking Council's in-principle support to end an agreement in whole, in its entirety as it relates to 78 Ashley Street, Paynesville. We are asking permission and resolution to determine to undertake the public notice as part of the request to end the agreement. And the third part of the recommendation is that we will report back to Council for a decision following the completion of the public notice. You may recall as part of background in relation to this matter, where the consent of all parties to amend or end an agreement cannot be achieved, a landowner can apply to the responsible authority to have the proposed assessed. The proposal can be to end the agreement in whole or in part as it relates to a section of land. The process is similar to that of making an application for a permit and can be broken down into the following steps. The first step, which is before you tonight, is to seek in-principle support. We then give notice. We then present for a responsible authority decision. We then make a decision and the decision takes effect. Essentially, Section 178 of the Planning Environment Act sets out the matters that we must consider when we're including agreements in the first place. In this case, the agreement was created in 2007, and its purpose was to sort to coordinate the overall subdivision of the residential estate as it applies to two planning permits. Subsequent to this, in recent times, a planning permit has been issued for a two-lot subdivision that pertains to 78 Ashley Street. And in doing so, the planning permit for subdivision and the development of each of those two new lots for dwellings has been issued. The ending of the agreement in question, as I present to you tonight, is part of a planning permit condition. Again, the recommendation is to agree in principle to allow the public notice to occur and to report back to Council. Essentially, the agreements in place relate to the layout as approved in planning permits, and that the ending of the agreement in question does not prevent the balance of the residential estate and the obligations with respect to drainage, open space and the extension of King Street. For all those reasons above, we respectfully request that we proceed with the next steps in relation to this application. Many thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillors, does anyone wish to ask a question? Nobody? Thank you. So would somebody like to move? No. Councillor Buckley has moved that, and Councillor Rotino has seconded it, and Councillor Peltz has given a surprise woo. Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. It all seems to be very straightforward, so let's get on with it. Thank you.
Good. So, Councillor Rotino.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Just to support Councillor Buckley's comments, this is an enabling process, and this motion does that tonight. So, yeah, let's get on with it.
Anyone else wish to speak? No? Good. All right. So, in order to get things going, as was said by Councillor Buckley, I will now ask councillors to vote. So, all those in favour of this motion? Thank you, councillors. That is unanimous also. (5.2.3) amend a Section 173 agreement. So I'll pass over to you again. Ms Reynolds, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors, members of ELT. This report presents to you tonight. It is a Section 173 legal agreement that pertains to 4 individual properties as listed at Golf Links Road, Lakes Entrance. The report presents to you this evening following community consultation and confirming that the public notice has been undertaken and that there were no written objections in relation to the amending of the agreement in question as it relates to the 4 individual residential properties. The amending of the agreement as it relates to the 4 individual titles seeks to delete reference to the upgrade of Golf Links Road, deletes reference to the development to proceed in accordance with 2 planning permits, and it relates to all costs to be borne by the landowner. Similar to the previous example, planning permits have been issued as they pertain to 2 of the properties with respect to allowing for development of 2 single detached dwellings. You will recall the amendment is seeking, the agreement actually requires that development proceed in accordance with approved plans, and this development has not been completed. New fresh planning permits have been issued for each of the land in question that propose different dwellings. The covenant in relation to retention and the planting of the rainforest, the existing rainforest of Meringbower Hill, is to be retained. The size of the allotments is critical with respect to retaining the element of the covenant with respect to retention of the vegetation, in that each of the lots are less than 4,000 square metres, so therefore the planning provisions in relation to retention of vegetation do not apply. Whilst the erosion management applies to the land, it is considered critical that the conservation and biodiversity is protected by retaining the element of the agreement in part with respect to retention of the rainforest. For all the reasons outlined above, the recommendation before you is that you agree to amend the agreements in part as pertaining to those 4 certificates of title, volume and folio numbers, by deletion of the covenant numbered 2B and 2C, and that the second part of the recommendation is that you require all costs of the ending of the legal agreement to be borne by the landowner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillors, do you have a question regarding these 173 agreements? Again, no. So can't get a question from anybody. So would somebody? Yeah, good. Councillor Rotino. Somebody wish to second it? Councillor Reeves is. Councillor Ellis, did you wish to second it?
I tried to move it, but it's okay. You're happy to second it. I don't. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I couldn't get your attention.
Good. I wouldn't make a very good auctioneer, would I? I'd miss a fair few bids. So, Councillor Rotino, would you wish to speak?
Nothing really to add, Mr Mayor, just to tidy up and get things moving along again.
Okay. I think we might allow Councillor Ellis to speak. He's being associated with the Lakes Entrance area, probably something that he would like to say a few words.
No pressure there, Mr. Mayor, I can see. Look, really, I don't. This is a tidying up of the eastern end of Lakes Entrance and the old Cancuna estate that was there. I look forward to Mr. Gazzardi doing something as the neighbour of the applicant here this evening, and really tidying that piece of roadway in Golf Links Road up. And I look forward to each of those entrepreneurs helping to move the economy of Lakes Entrance forward. I recommend the application for council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Good. So yeah, we'll put this this to the vote. So all those in favour of the 173 agreements? Good. Thank you, councillors. That's unanimous also. Now, the next item on the agenda is 5.2.4, of which, before we begin discussion on it, the applicant has made a request to speak, for which Mr. Cannizzaro will read this. Now, it is quite lengthy, and we'll see where we go for time, but there is a 5-minute allowance to speak, so we'll see how far Mr. Cannizzaro gets, and I'll make perhaps a decision on whether he's able to complete the reading. So I'll take it that it is 7:47. Thank you, Mr. Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a request to speak on agenda item 5.2.4, planning application 123/2020/P for refusal proposed 2-lot subdivision from a Mr. Ian Long of Granite Rock. Introduction. On 30th of March, this planning application was submitted to Council to realign boundaries between 2 allotments in order to develop better land management and commercial outcomes. Some 5 months later, we were advised that planning officers were intending to recommend refusal, despite the application having received no objections from the notification and referral process. I would like it noted that providing a written submission limits our capacity to fully and effectively communicate to Council as to how the planning application meets and complies with state and local planning legislation. Under the heading of strategic planning issues, the grounds for refusal offered in the officer's report, I believe, are not justifiable, and the contents below serve to substantiate my position. The state provisions of the East Gippsland Planning Scheme referred to seek to discourage development and subdivision of productive and state significant farming land. This land is not viable or productive agricultural land that is of state significance. Until a rural land use strategy is prepared to provide clear direction for this type of proposal, Council cannot legitimately refuse properties as the land is not capable of generating a viable income from agricultural alone. As evidenced by all owners working in other jobs providing primary income or are retired. The area in general comprises smaller properties ranging in size between 2 hectares and 37 hectares, with a significant proportion of blocks containing areas of hinterland forest. The claim that the subdivision has not adequately responded to the potential bushfire risk is factually incorrect, given this Country Fire Authority have deemed the subdivision appropriate. Despite not seeking approval for a dwelling at this time, I was required to provide a bushfire management plan at a cost of approximately $3,000. In addition to this, a geotechnical risk assessment was required at a cost of approximately $600. This is excessive, given there is no request for a dwelling and no intention of council officers to approve. The intrinsic value of the land does not support the notion of a farm as being able to generate substantive income. The land use outcome, if refused, will remain as 4 hectares of marginally productive cleared farmland. If the permit is granted, the boundary realignment by way of subdivision has future capacity to generate additional rateable income of $2,000 plus per annum to the East Gippsland Shire, and is likely to generate an investment of approximately $600,000 for future development at no cost to the East Gippsland Shire. The existing services and facilities available in this location support future development, including road infrastructure, power, town water, school bus and community. It is likely that investment will come from outside the region, adding further value to the proposal. Valuer General has assessed and provided rate valuation on the site as a residential rural and rural lifestyle property with a site value of $231,000 or $28,000 per hectare, which is up to 4 times higher the viable agricultural land. For as long as I can remember, the land has been valued as rural residential and I have been charged rates accordingly, under the heading of quarry management issues. I was advised that Council had overlooked the need to contact the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions with a notice of proposal in accordance with section 52, brackets 1, bracket C, clause 52.09-7 of the East Gippsland Planning Scheme. DJPR was subsequently contacted on Wednesday the 9th of September 2020 and I was advised accordingly on Thursday the 10th of September. It should be noted that among others, the existing owner-operators of the Granite Rock Quarry, Casa Sir Proprietary Limited, were contacted by registered mail in accordance with the notice of application requirements as directed by planning officers in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act. Casaca did not object to the planning application, and that sentence is in bold. I find it intriguing that the need to issue the notice of proposal in accordance with section 52 brackets 1C, clause 52.09-7 to the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions came after the council briefing exhibits a possible lack of competence on behalf of planning staff or a blatant attempt to achieve a pre-orchestrated planning outcome. Whilst we understand the regulative requirement to notify DJPR and respect their right to object, we believe the objections are generalist in nature with the objective of protecting the extractive industries. We also believe that the objections are not applicable to the operation of the Granite Rock Quarry. Again, as evidenced by Casaca Proprietary Limited not lodging an objective through the notice of application process. I think the word objective should be objection. We built our existing residence in 1985 at the same time the disused quarry was reactivated and have been an adjoining neighbour of that quarry now for 35 years. At the time of its reactivation, we met with the proprietors who liaised closely with the local community, which provided details of the resource and how it was planned to operate into the future. The following information was provided. Bullet point 1, the resource comprises a granitic intrusion contained within the land zone special use, Schedule 3 and estimated to be 7 to 8 kilometres deep. Given the extent of the resource, nature of demand and existing quarrying technologies, the resource would remain viable for in excess of 100 years. In the 35 years as an adjoining resident, only a small proportion of the quarry resource has actually been quarried, with much of the surface interface component yet to be accessed. Accordingly, the likelihood of expansion will be very slow for many decades to come. Expansion at that time will still be possible and always be expected to be the subject of commercial negotiations. Bullet point 2. Blasting will be undertaken periodically to access the parent material for processing, brackets crushing, and explosive technology was emerging that will significantly reduce risk of off-site impacts. In the 35 years of observed operation, there is yet to be any evidence of distribution of rock onto adjoining land as a result of blasting or any evidence of danger to either life, property or livestock. I hereby offer the following information in support of my planning application to address the council planning and DJPR issues identified. Issue. The subject land does not meet the farming objectives of the zone, and as such this will have an impact on the existing work authority should a dwelling proposal follow. Bullet point 1. The subject land, by virtue of its title size, original 8 hectare allotment and physical characteristics, 50% native vegetation and 50% cleared land, intrinsically does not meet farming zone objectives, and the native vegetation component is protected by clause 52.17. Bullet point 2. There is no information provided by DJPR that would indicate how the proposal would potentially affect the work authority. Bullet point 3. I would contend that if the quarry continues to operate in a legal and compliant manner, as it has done for the past 35 years, the proposal would not impact on the work authority. Bullet point 4. Any future owner would purchase and conduct activities on the land with full awareness of the presence of the adjacent operating quarry, and the quarry should have no fear of new residents if it complies with the conditions contained in the work authority. Bullet point 5. There are existing dwellings closer to the quarry than a potential dwelling on the subject land. Issue number 2. The existing extractive industry is a blasting quarry and as such will present a risk to property, human life and infrastructure in the event that a future dwelling is proposed on the site or sought. Bullet point 1. Work authorities are prepared and implemented to manage not only safe and environmentally acceptable quarrying practices, but also to mitigate risk to human life, property and assets of adjoining landholders. Continued advances in blasting technologies with controlled timing of blast ignition, brackets millisecond delays, has significantly reduced risk of unintended material distribution outside controlled areas and aided noise and dust suppression associated with blasting. Bullet point 3.
Could we perhaps move on? We've well and truly used up the 5 minutes. Perhaps to get to the conclusion at this stage, please.
Certainly. So the conclusion put forward by Mr. Ian Long. It is my belief that this proposal, given the above considerations, will in no way impact on the existing work authority and the capacity of the quarry to continue under the conditions it has for many years. Given the nature and extent of the local geology, this proposal will not limit the capacity of the quarry to extend or intensify their operations. Should quarry owners wish to extend their land base, market and commercial realities would apply. This proposal will result in net benefits to the East Gippsland Shire and its residents and ratepayers, and as such should be supported by Council. Thank you for your time in hearing this submission, Mr. Ian Long. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Cannizzaro. So now I'll pass over to Ms. Reynolds to give us a summary on the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening we would like to present to Council the planning application 120/2020/P for Peter as applying to 277 and 355 Deptford Road, Granite Rock. The recommendation before Council this evening is for a refusal to grant a permit for a 2-lot subdivision to realign a common boundary between 2 allotments. Councillors, it's worth noting that the required notice to the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions was late. The reason that this notice was late is that it's an unusual notice and it was not a clause that we regularly have to use from our planning scheme and in the operation of our planning scheme. I wish to advise Council tonight that an objection has been received and was lodged by the Earth Resources Regulations branch of the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, dated today, being the 15th of September, by email. This correspondence has been forwarded to you for advice. We also note that preliminary advice was provided by the Department or the Earth Resources Regulation branch on the 10th of September in relation to a foreshadowed objection. There are 4 grounds of objection which I would like to paraphrase. The first objection relates to the statement that it's unclear how the proposed lot sizes contribute to farming practices or how these lot sizes meet the objectives of the farming zone. The second relates to the proposal is not appropriate outcome as it relates to a clause in the planning scheme that relates to land use compatibility at clause 13.07-1S of the state planning provisions, by diminishing the opportunity to minimise off-site impacts arising from the extractive industry operation. The third element relates to clause 1403-1S of the state planning provisions as it relates to the protection of the resource exploration and extractive resources within the planning scheme. The proposed subdivision will diminish the informal buffer afforded to the existing extractive industry operation and may pose a risk to the current and future expansion of the extractive industry. The fourth ground of objection, given the proximity to the current extractive industry, the application has not considered the impacts of the associated operation in terms of specifically the blasting, noises and air vibrations. As explained to councillors, clause 1307 of the planning scheme is a state provision that relates to land use compatibility, and it seeks to ensure that any uses and developments of land is compatible with adjoining and nearby land uses. I refer to clause 5209, which is a clause of it's a general planning provision in the planning scheme that relates to extractive industry and extractive industry interest areas. And this provision seeks to ensure that stone resources which may be required by the community for future use are protected from inappropriate use and development. The notice requirements in question apply to use and development of land within 500 metres of any existing or proposed extractive industry. With respect to the application and its details, the subject land is zone farming zone. It's contained with the Schedule 1, which is a 40-hectare schedule. The land is partially included in the bushfire management overlay and is wholly contained with the erosion management overlay. There are 2 existing certificates of title, one being approximately 8 hectares in area, which contains an existing dwelling, and the second certificate of title is of an approximate 600 square metre allotment, which contains water infrastructure in the form of water tanks. As stated, there is an existing dwelling on the 8-hectare allotment, and it is partially cleared and partially timbered. The land adjoins the Granite Rock Quarry on its southwest boundary. The proposal seeks approval to create a 4-hectare allotment, a vacant allotment, with the purposes of a future dwelling. Within 7 weeks of the planning permit being submitted, officers attempted to negotiate with the landowner that the issue of the planning permit with an appropriate legal conditions, which required a Section 173 legal agreement, which had the specific aim to preclude the use of the dwelling for an additional dwelling on the vacant allotment. This offer was rejected by the applicant. The outcome, in our opinion, and having regard for the planning, achieves a rural residential outcome in a farming zone. This farming zone is a designated farming zone and is designated to have 40-hectare allotments. This land is within an identified farming district. The development of a dwelling in close proximity to an operating quarry is a poor planning outcome, as it specifically fails to protect the earth resource, both existing and the future expansion of the quarry. The application was supported by a farm management plan which outlined a proposed equine management enterprise. Officers have prepared a recommendation which makes a recommendation to issue a notice of refusal to grant a permit. There are 9 grounds of refusal. I would like to take you to the existing local planning policy, specifically 3 strategies that address our rural land for East Gippsland Shire. Our planning policy, specifically at 1.1 strategy, contains strategies, objectives which seek to avoid subdivision outside areas which are defined suitable for rural residential development. Our local planning strategy as it exists today in our planning scheme at 1.2 discourages subdivisions for smaller lots except where subdivision will facilitate the effective use of the land for agriculture. Our existing planning policy at our local level at strategy 1.3 specifically seeks to discourage subdivision for rural living in agricultural areas. Planning policy at the state level seeks to direct housing growth into existing settlements. State policy discourages development of isolated small lots for houses in rural zones, and state policy encourages the consolidating of existing small lots in rural zones. Officers' negotiation with the landowner to impose a legal agreement, a Section 17 legal agreement, was justified, and this would have allowed the subdivision to issue with restrictions to ensure that the land was used for a rural purpose, and to prevent the further development of an additional allotment into this rural setting. On balance, and in summary, in support of the proposed 9 grounds of refusal, the position is this. The specified schedule for the farming zone is 40 hectares for subdivision and the development of dwellings. The land in question is 8 hectares approximately in area and contains an existing dwelling. The commencement of the equine business is supported by the zone and is not in question. There is no opportunity to commence 2 new agricultural enterprises given the size of the land and the nature of the land. The option for a Section 173 legal agreement would have facilitated the issue of the planning permit for the subdivision of the common boundary. The farming zone does not facilitate the creation of hobby farms or rural residential lifestyle properties. The development of the dwelling, an additional dwelling in close proximity of the existing and operating quarry, will have a detrimental impact on the continuation and on any expansion of the existing quarry. The use and the development of an additional dwelling in this location will result in an increased demand for urbanised infrastructure and services. This application cannot be supported having regard for the existing provisions of the East Gippsland Planning Scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Councillors may have questions of our planning officer.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Councillor Buckley?
Yeah, did I hear correctly in you saying that it's in a rural residential zone? Is this application?
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. It's in a farming zone, Schedule 1.
And that's got nothing to do with a rural residential zone?
It's not in a rural living zone.
You can't have overlapping zones, that's what I'm trying to get at.
No, you can't, Councillor Buckley.
Thank you. And how many sort of local objections were there from farmers that live about that place? And you said there was 4 objections, I think. And
there was. Sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, it's this is a sort of a double question. There was there any local, residents' objections, and was there an objection from the quarry people, the people that operate the quarry?
There were no objections from adjoining owners, and there was no objections from the current operators of the quarry.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ms Reynolds, just a question in relation to when the application was first lodged and where we are now. I know there's a statutory requirement to determine a planning application within a certain time frame, but then there's also the question around if we're not encouraging that sort of development, the costs that the proponent's gone to look at the fire zones or the CFA approvals and stuff, and is there a better process for us to help guide these applications up front rather than wait till the end?
Certainly, Councillor Rotino. Yes, the process encourages the use of pre-application meetings. In this case, the application was not the subject of a pre-application meeting. Planning officers were in contact with the applicant in the early stages to discuss the application and the merits of the application, having regard for the farming zone. The overlays pertaining to the land with respect to bushfire management and erosion management overlay, the requirements are required to prepare detailed expert reports with respect to bushfire and geotechnical. They are requirements of the planning scheme.
Thank you, Nicole. Now, Councillor Toohey, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nicole, in regards to the future expansion of the quarry, have you any idea in what direction that would head?
Councillor Toohey, thank you for your question. I do not.
And just a further question in regards to surrounding farmland. Is there any surrounding farm that would benefit from this property being amalgamated and create a lot that would allow a further house to be built?
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. If I understand your question, it refers to perhaps the state policy of encouraging consolidation with adjoining lots. Is that your question? And
yes.
Whether we've explored whether there's opportunity for consolidation? No, we have not.
Okay. The other thing that I do notice in the recommendation, item 1 in the officer recommendation says that the proposed subdivision is inconsistent with the farming zone and does not adequately address the key relevant decision guidelines. I could suggest that that this property is inconsistent with the farming zone, insofar as it's not 40 acres, 40 hectares anyway, and that it's not fit for farming. So I see, personally, I see a bit of a conflict there in regards to this particular piece of land being termed or being in the farming zone when it's not the size that it should be and never has been. It's not been subdivided down, and that it's certainly not suitable for farming. So that leaves me with a bit of an issue in regards to this particular recommendation. I'm sorry, that's probably more a comment than a question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Now, Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr Reynolds, my question regards to the discussion around the Section 173 agreement that you mentioned and that was proposed in a negotiation with the proponent. What was the nature of the agreement again? Can you just clarify that? So a suggestion was made that this could proceed on the basis of entering into a 173 agreement with Council.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves, for your question. It was on the basis that it is a subdivision. It's using a provision under the farming zone which allows application to be made, which realigns a common boundary. The nature of the request from the officers was the willingness to enter into a legal agreement that would be registered on the title, which had a restriction that the land would not be used for a dwelling on the vacant allotment, and that there would be no further subdivision. But the primary negotiation was that the vacant allotment, approximately 4 hectares, cleared for pasture, would not be able to be used for the purposes of a dwelling.
And I understand the proponent was not in agreement with that suggestion?
That is correct.
So by implication then, my understanding would be the intention would be to build something on that if that particular block was subdivided, and this would be in a farming zone adjacent to an operating quarry.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Good. I've got, there you are. I got the nod from that you were asking a question, Councillor Ellis. You're on, you need to...
Yeah. You're a champion, Mr Mayor, thank you. It's just a couple of things. I'd like to revert back to the applicant's letter, Nicole. Just generally, is there anything that's outstandingly wrong in what he says, aside from his rebuttal of the objections from the authorities? Are there in fact houses within the 500 metre barrier that's come up, and if so, why were they given a permit to do it, or is this too old a question to be able to answer?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Yes, there are dwellings, there are existing dwellings within the 500 metre. I have not, I do not have the details, nor have I done the history as to when those dwellings were developed, or whether they, and what permissions they have. But I'm able to confirm, yes, there are existing dwellings within the 500 metres. Our position that we are presenting to you this evening is that it does not justify for more dwellings to be approved within that 500 metre, having regard for the operation and the continuation of the quarry.
Okay. And the obvious question is that, well, one obvious question comes to me after reading the reports and the applicant's impassioned letter to us, which was quite good. What really is the difference between a similar application we made at Sarsfield, where we approved it, and this application here, where there was the alignment of boundaries and the granting of a permit for a property that was less than 40 hectares? Is there any correlation with any of those, or any real difference aside from the fact that there is a mining activity taking place?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Ellis. I'm not sure I can recall quickly the example that you're using in Sarsfield, so my apologies for not having being able to recall the application that you are referring to. But I guess the most direct answer is that the distinguishing characteristics with respect to this application are the existing and the continuation of the quarry in close proximity, and having regard for those clauses with respect to the protection of that stone resource from inappropriate use and development, and also the clauses around the state planning provisions around agriculture, and the 3 clauses from our local planning policy with respect to rural residential development in farming areas.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Good. I'll just ask once more if there were any more questions from councillors. Thank you, Councillor Roos. Do we have a seconder? There we go. Councillor O'Connell has seconded. So, Councillor Roos, you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. Councillors, this application goes to the heart of ordered, organised, planned, orderly and predictable planning, and avoids the pitfalls of ad hoc decision making in a planning department and in a council. I think the recommendation that, the recommendation that has been provided coherently and logically provides the rationale for the grounds of refusal. And the difference perhaps between this application and that is alluded to by Councillor Ellis is the strategic resource lying right beside the proposed application. This is a resource of strategic importance for our shire and the future of our shire. The questions have been raised around proximity, small sizes of allotments and so on. They're legacy matters, and we have to make decisions that are good planning decisions for the future. I'm aware of and concerned about the notion that the Section 173 negotiations were refused or hadn't been entered into, and it provides clearly an indication to me the intention is to sell the block as a residential development, and that would be a bad, incompatible use in this particular area, and it provides a dangerous precedent in the area as well. I think in considering the matter, councillors, for me, I have to consider not just the single applicant, but the effect on the multiple others around the application and the precedent that could set. And again, council, we have an obligation to plan for the future in an orderly, organised and planned way. And I urge you, councillors, to take the emotion out of your decision, and I agree that it's a very impassioned letter that has been written, but we have to make a decision on planning merit and the future of the planning merit and the implications on our particular region. And for those reasons, that's why I agree with the recommendation and I ask you to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor O'Connell?
Oh, thanks. Look, I won't add much more other than to endorse Councillor Reeves' comments.
You've somehow or other, you're not coming through.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Look, no, I won't add much more other than to endorse Councillor Reeves' comments, and you know, I can understand Mr. Long's frustrations in the time taken to get to this point. However, you know, as Councillor Reeves outlined, I think it's important that the planning, this is taken on its planning grounds, so I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Rotino, you wish to speak?
Yeah, look, Mr Mayor, I'm reluctantly supporting this, and my reluctance comes from the fact of how long this process has taken to get the response back to the applicant. But the thing that's really changed my thinking around this is the letter sent from Earth Resources. They are a referral authority and we send it to them for a reason. And to put it in context, I often drive out to the waste station out on, our main one out at Johnson's Road. And if you look north when you're driving in there, there's some of the best views you can get in East Gippsland. Now, would we allow a place to be built along there because it's got good views and it's marginal farmland? So that's the thing that has helped me support this tonight. Thanks.
Councillor Buckley.
In spite of your eloquence, Councillor Reeves, I'm afraid I can't support your argument. By all these 9 major things against it would appear to me to be no good for anything at all if we were to follow these recommendations. And I would think if it's no good for farming and no good for anything else at all, it could be quite good for lifestyle development. And I am not going to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Was anyone else wish to speak for or against? Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with Councillor Buckley. I know this area fairly well out there. I lived out there for quite a number of years. This particular piece of land can't be amalgamated with another farm. It's marginal at best. Its one redeeming feature is the views from the top of this property. The other factor that I take into account is the fact that there are a number of houses closer to the quarry than this particular house, and I think it's possible that if we did allow this, we could perhaps stipulate an area where the house could be built. I don't recall the term for that. I don't believe it would have a negative effect on surrounding farmland. The property itself was never big enough to fit into the farm zone, and never has been. And the other thing that I do see, and that was the reason why I asked the question in regards to the expansion of the quarry, was that I believe that will move further west. It simply can't move east closer to this property because or south. But it will move away from this property, not closer to it. So I can't support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey, and planners, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the word was building envelope. Was that the word you were looking for? Yes.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
He's in my blind spot. I tell you, he's got to move. Sorry, Councillor Ellis. You go ahead, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is a complex issue, and it comes back to, and I try to put it into simple terms, that if we have a chicken farm, which is not a very popular sort of enterprise in terms of odours, or even a pig farm or something like that, and it's located in a isolated area, and then bit by bit homes build up and come into it, the objection is for the existing farming enterprise to be removed to somewhere better. Well, we've got a quarry, we've got a set of regulations that are quite rigid, demanding that the farming or primary enterprise be protected, and that's what we must take into account. I use that colourful language rather than as what did Councillor Buckley say? Councillor Reeves's prose. But the practice is we've got to follow good practical planning advice, and that is that we have to support the officer's recommendation here this evening. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis, and I must reiterate what I said earlier, that if I was an auctioneer I would miss your bid every time. I'm sorry about that. So, Councillor Reeves, I gather you'd like your right of reply.
Look, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. And indeed, it is a complex matter, and one does become emotionally involved in these, especially when one drives out there and is taken in by the view. However, this is one particular view, one particular proposed residential development. Let's say what the intention is on this, is to capitalise from the opportunism of a subdivision for a residential development. Lifestyle also is sealed roads. Lifestyle is also access to mineral resources. Lifestyle is also access to the opportunities that mineral extraction provides us, the wealth that it provides us, the jobs that it provides us, the sealed roads that it provides us up to Benambra, or maybe the Corryong Road in future could be from this particular quarry. And that is a strategic resource. One lost potential residential development could impact a significant opportunity created by the strategic resource that's here, councillors. You need to pay regard to the land management overlays, the zones, the statutory regulations, and when you don't, we start dipping in our toes into water of unknown outcomes. And I think that the risk is that if you disregard those, then an appeal process will ensue anyway. At least if there's a decision tonight, as recommended, the proponent can get on with an alternative. And that's, I know that sounds rather harsh, but that's a reality. Whereas if the recommendation is refused, there needs to be an alternative, and then I think that there could be an appeal process from Earth Resources. That's what could well happen, and that would delay and elongate the process. So, councillors, it's a complex matter. The rationale it's provided is very, very well articulated and considerably well thought out by the planning officers, and I congratulate them on that. And I apologise to the proponent because I need to support the recommendation based on planning grounds. And I hope you do too.
Thank you for that, Councillor Reeves.
I don't have a right to reply to that.
No.
Okay, thank you.
You answered your own question. So, for councillors, for item 5.2.4, for all those councillors are in favour of the officer's recommendation, please raise your hands. So we have 6, so those against. Thank you, councillors. For the minutes, it's Councillor Toohey, Councillor Roberts and Councillor Buckley who have voted against. So I formally advise that the application has been refused. Thank you, councillors. That leads us to 5.3.1, which is our draft annual financial statements for 2019 and 2020 and draft performance statement for 2019-2020. So you may introduce this, Mr. Cannizzaro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to just introduce Liz Collins, who is Manager for Finance and who is our subject matter expert, who will take you through the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And welcome, Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, councillors. Councillors, the audit of the financial statements and the performance statement is at the end of the process, whereby the draft financial statements for 1920 and the performance statement 1920 have been submitted to the Victorian Auditor General for final review. As part of that process, to ensure there is a timely finalisation and issue of the audit report, there's provisions within the Local Government Act that allows Council to give its in-principle approval to the financial statements and the performance statement, and to also appoint 2 councillors to sign the certification of both those statements in their final form, subject to no material change identified by the Victorian Auditor General. Today at the Audit Committee meeting, the Audit Committee recommended that Council give its in-principle approval to the attached draft financial statements and performance statement for 2019-20 and also appoint 2 councillors to certify the financial statements and the performance statement 2019-20 in their final form. So tonight there are 3 recommendations there for Council consider, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions, councillors? That wasn't a question. So it would appear there are no questions. So would Councillor Peltz wishes to move?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Somebody, a councillor wish to second it? Wave you, there you go. I was watching directly at you then, Councillor Ellis, and Councillor Ellis has seconded.
Got her hand up again.
Yes, we do. In this at this stage, is this when we do nominate the 2 councillors? Yes, Ms. Collins.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes. So included in that recommendation, Council will need to nominate who the 2 councillors are that will be signing the certification. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
I think our mover has that in hand, so we'll go with
I'd like to
Councillor
move
Belts.
Councillor Tui and Councillor Rotino to be the authority to sign this document. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Councillor Tui and Rotino, do you agree? Thank you. So, so I saw you waving there before, and I thought, well, you actually don't get to vote, so I was wondering what you're waving for. So, so that we've covered that off by we have confirmation that Councillor Tui and Councillor Rotino will be the signatories to that document as it leaves our office. So. Do you wish to say anything towards...
I'd just like to say well done, job well done, Liz, on behalf of us councillors, and as always, your work is great. You've been really honest and true and fair with regards to everything within this report, so it's been thrashed around and turned inside out, and we've had many discussions about it, so really thank you for everything you've done, and to everyone that's given you a hand along the way. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. How about yourself, Councillor Ellis? You wish to say a few words?
No, it's not necessary. The financial reports are as presented, Mr Mayor, and everyone else has made congratulatory reports through the Audit Committee and through today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? That's all good. So all those in favour of accepting this, it's a unanimous, I believe. Could I please see your hand again, Councillor Ellis? Yeah, thank you. So that's a unanimous decision. Thank you, councillors. Now, that moves us to an area of the agenda which contains confidential reports, and that is items 7.1 to 7.6. So could I ask...
Mr Mayor, just urgent and other business?
Oh, I'm really sorry. How did I miss that? Oh, I could have missed it because it's not there. Maybe. It's right at the top. Sorry about that. Do we have any urgent and other business? Mr Canizaro?
No, not to hand.
Not identified. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. You got me on procedure though. So now we have our items 7.1 to 7.6, which are deemed confidential business. So would somebody wish to move and second that we move into in camera, please? Thank you, Councillor Rotino.
Thanks,
and
Mr Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Roberts, sorry.
I move that Council close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provisions of Section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to consider commercial in confidence items listed. Thanks.
Good. So all those in favour? Thank you, councillors. No, we had Councillor Roberts seconded it. Thank you. Yes. So thank you. We will go in camera. We just need to wait for the screening to cease.